The streets of Pozzuoli have learned to recognize the language of an earthquake. It can begin with a window trembling, a glass rattling across a table, or a deep vibration passing through the walls of a home. Then comes the instinctive decision: remain inside and wait, or step outdoors with everyone else who felt the same thing. At Campi Flegrei, that decision has become increasingly familiar. Earthquakes, ground deformation, and continuing volcanic unrest have transformed what was once background geology into an everyday concern. For residents, the issue is no longer simply whether Campi Flegrei is an active volcano. They already know it is. The question now is how long this unrest will continue, how much more disruption it can produce, and whether authorities are prepared for what comes next. That concern reached another level after a magnitude 4.7 earthquake struck the Campi Flegrei area near Naples on July 31, 2026. The earthquake occurred at a shallow depth of roughly 3 kilometers, or about 2 miles, and was strong enough to send residents rushing outside. Reports describe damage to buildings, power disruptions, transportation problems, injuries, and evacuations in Pozzuoli and surrounding communities. Aftershocks followed, adding to an atmosphere that was already tense because of months and years of continuing seismic activity. On the global earthquake scale, a magnitude 4.7 event is not considered enormous, but magnitude alone does not determine the consequences. In a densely populated volcanic region, especially where earthquakes occur close to the surface, a moderate earthquake can become a major social and infrastructure event almost immediately. For people living around Campi Flegrei, the experience of an earthquake cannot be reduced to a number on a seismological chart. A shallow earthquake can produce intense local shaking because its energy does not have to travel far before reaching buildings. That is especially important in Pozzuoli, where historic structures stand alongside modern apartment buildings, roads, businesses, and transportation infrastructure. The Italian Civil Protection Department has emphasized that earthquakes associated with bradyseism can be relatively modest in magnitude while still being strongly felt and capable of causing damage because of their shallow depths. This helps explain why residents can experience an earthquake as a serious emergency, even when the same magnitude might appear relatively insignificant on an international scale. For the people underneath the shaking, the number is only the beginning of the story. The July earthquake also demonstrated something important about volcanic emergencies. An eruption is not required for a volcano to create a crisis. Electricity can fail, roads can become blocked, buildings can require urgent inspections, rail services can be interrupted, cliffs can collapse, ports can experience damage. Families can be forced to leave homes that may have been standing for generations. Those consequences can occur during an earthquake without a single drop of lava reaching the surface. At Campi Flegrei, that distinction matters because public attention often focuses on the possibility of a future eruption. Yet the immediate hazards faced by residents include earthquakes, ground deformation, landslides, infrastructure failures, and localized gas hazards. The volcano does not need to erupt for people to experience the consequences of living above an active and restless geological system. The protests in Pozzuoli, therefore, cannot simply be dismissed as fear of an imaginary catastrophe. Residents have experienced real earthquakes and real disruptions. Reports from the area have described demonstrations following seismic events, including protests connected with transportation and infrastructure concerns. One report confirmed the port of Pozzuoli being blocked after an earthquake, illustrating how quickly seismic anxiety can become a broader dispute over public services and government response. For residents, transportation is not an abstract issue. The port connects communities and supports economic activity. Roads and railways become even more important during emergencies because evacuation and emergency access depend upon them. When people believe those systems are vulnerable, anger can emerge quickly, particularly after another earthquake reminds everyone how little control they have over the forces beneath the city. Campi Flegrei itself is unlike the stereotypical image of a volcano. There is no single, towering cone dominating the skyline in the way Mount Vesuvius does. Instead, Campi Flegrei is a vast volcanic caldera extending across a complex landscape west of Naples and beneath parts of the Gulf of Pozzuoli. Its volcanic structures are spread across a broad area that includes neighborhoods, roads, archaeological sites, industrial districts, farmland, and coastline. Much of the system is hidden beneath the modern landscape. That makes it more difficult for people unfamiliar with the region to understand what they are looking at. The volcano is not simply a mountain. It is a huge geological system capable of producing earthquakes, ground deformation, hydrothermal activity, and volcanic eruptions. Millions of people live in the broader Naples region, placing extraordinary human pressure on an already complicated volcanic environment. One of the most important processes at Campi Flegrei is known as bradyseism. The term describes the gradual rising and sinking of the ground, and the phenomenon has shaped the history of Pozzuoli for centuries. Changes in pressure, heat, and fluids beneath the caldera can cause the surface to rise or fall over time. A few millimeters may be almost impossible for an individual to notice, but sustained movement over months or years can become significant. According to Italian civil protection information, the maximum uplift measured at Rione Terra in Pozzuoli reached approximately 163.5 centimeters, or about 5 feet 4 inches, by the end of March 2026. About 25.5 centimeters, or approximately 10 inches, of that increase occurred from January 2025 onward. That amount of movement is substantial, but it requires careful interpretation. Ground uplift does not automatically mean an eruption is approaching. Volcanic systems can deform significantly without producing an eruption. The underground processes responsible for deformation can involve the movement of fluids, changes in pressure, and the fracturing of rock. Scientists therefore monitor not only how much the ground is rising, but also where it is rising, how quickly the rate is changing, and whether other signals are changing at the same time. That distinction is crucial because a single measurement can be alarming without necessarily indicating an imminent eruption. Campi Flegrei is a complex system, and its behavior cannot be understood through one graph, one earthquake, or one unusual gas measurement. Scientists are looking for patterns across many independent monitoring systems. Those monitoring systems are extensive. The Osservatorio Vesuviano, operated by Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology, continuously monitors seismicity, ground deformation, volcanic gases, and other indicators of activity around Campi Flegrei. Satellite radar can detect tiny changes in the elevation of the land over broad areas. GPS stations can measure movement with remarkable precision. Seismometers record earthquakes that people never feel, allowing scientists to identify where fractures are occurring underground. Gas measurements provide another window into the volcanic system because changes in underground pressure and fluid movement can influence emissions at the surface. None of these measurements provides a perfect prediction of the future. Together, however, they create a detailed picture of how the caldera is behaving. That information is essential when authorities must decide whether the alert level should change. The official alert level remains yellow, which indicates an intermediate level of volcanic unrest rather than an eruption warning. That distinction is extremely important. Yellow alert does not mean that an eruption is imminent. It means the volcanic system is showing changes above its baseline condition and requires enhanced monitoring and preparedness. The Osservatorio Vesuviano reported hundreds of earthquakes during recent monitoring periods, with most being small. During June 2026, hundreds of seismic events were recorded, with the largest reaching approximately magnitude 3.6. Many occurred within the shallow upper portion of the crust beneath the caldera. These earthquakes demonstrate that the system remains active, but earthquake counts alone cannot determine whether Campi Flegrei is moving toward an eruption. Scientists must examine the entire collection of evidence before reaching conclusions about changing volcanic behavior. The location and depth of the earthquakes are especially important. Many Campi Flegrei earthquakes occur within only a few kilometers of the surface. During the June monitoring period, much of the recorded seismicity was concentrated around areas including Pozzuoli, Agnano, Solfatara, Pisciarelli, Bagnoli, and the Gulf of Pozzuoli. Most events occurred within roughly 3 kilometers, or about 2 miles, while the deepest recorded events reached approximately 4 kilometers, or 2.5 miles. These depths are extremely shallow compared with many tectonic earthquakes. That helps explain why residents can feel even relatively modest earthquakes so clearly. It also gives scientists valuable information about where the crust is fracturing and how underground pressure may be affecting the system. The pattern matters more than any individual tremor. History provides another reason people around Pozzuoli remain alert. The area experienced a major bradyseismic crisis between 1982 and 1984. During that period, the ground rose dramatically and thousands of residents were evacuated from Pozzuoli. Earthquakes became frequent enough to disrupt everyday life and create widespread fear. The current unrest has similarities to that earlier period, particularly in the combination of ground uplift and shallow seismicity. But the two crises are not identical, and scientists cannot simply assume that the present sequence will follow the same path. History provides evidence, not a predetermined script. For older residents, however, the memory of the 1980s is powerful. Families who remember evacuation have passed those experiences to younger generations, creating a community where volcanic unrest is not merely something found in textbooks. That historical memory helps explain why public reaction can become intense after a stronger earthquake. People are not encountering the subject for the first time. They already know what prolonged seismic unrest feels like. They know that earthquakes can continue for months. They know that ground deformation can affect buildings and infrastructure. They know that emergency planning can eventually become a question of whether people need to leave their homes. When another strong earthquake strikes, those memories return immediately. The psychological impact can therefore be larger than the physical damage alone. A building may survive with only minor cracks, but residents can still lose confidence in its safety. A road can reopen after inspection, but people may continue worrying about the next earthquake. This is one of the hidden costs of prolonged volcanic unrest. Uncertainty itself becomes part of everyday life. The current situation also highlights a difficult communication problem. Residents want clear answers, but volcanic science rarely provides simple yes or no conclusions. People understandably ask whether Campi Flegrei is getting closer to an eruption. Scientists must answer with probabilities, monitoring trends and uncertainty. An increase in earthquakes does not automatically mean magma is rising toward the surface. Ground uplift does not automatically mean an eruption is about to begin. Gas changes do not automatically indicate that magma is approaching. Yet, if several independent signals begin changing together, scientists may become increasingly concerned. The challenge is recognizing when a collection of signals represents ordinary unrest and when it represents a significant change in the volcanic system. That is why monitoring must continue constantly rather than only during major earthquakes. The scientific debate became especially visible after a preliminary study published in 2026 proposed that Campi Flegrei could be approaching a critical transition under certain mathematical assumptions. The research attracted attention because it suggested a possible time window in the coming decade. But the study was a preliminary preprint rather than an official eruption forecast. INGV subsequently issued a clarification warning that media interpretations had gone beyond what the research actually demonstrated. The institute emphasized that the study remained under scientific review and should not be interpreted as a deterministic prediction of an eruption. This distinction matters enormously. A scientific model can identify a possible trajectory without declaring that the future is fixed. Volcanic systems are dynamic, and models are tools for understanding risk rather than crystal balls that reveal an exact date. That episode also demonstrates why residents may sometimes feel that scientists are saying one thing while the headlines say another. A scientific paper may contain careful language about uncertainty, assumptions, and probability. A headline can compress that complexity into a dramatic statement about a volcano approaching eruption. Residents then encounter social media posts repeating the most alarming interpretation. Within hours, a technical discussion can become a public fear event. That does not mean the underlying science is unimportant. It means communication becomes part of the emergency response. At Campi Flegrei, accurate information is itself a form of protection. People need to understand what an alert level means, what earthquakes can and cannot indicate, where official information comes from, and what actions they should take when shaking occurs. The July 31st earthquake made that challenge particularly visible. Reports described injuries, damaged buildings, and evacuations, with several hundred residents temporarily displaced from structures that were considered damaged or potentially unsafe. Power failures affected households, while transportation services experienced disruption. A cliff collapse and damage around the waterfront added to the disruption. None of these consequences required an eruption. The earthquake alone was enough to create a significant emergency. This is why focusing exclusively on the possibility of a future volcanic eruption can actually distract from the immediate risk. Residents need protection from earthquakes regardless of whether magma eventually reaches the surface. Strengthening buildings, improving emergency routes, protecting critical infrastructure, and maintaining clear evacuation plans can reduce risk under multiple possible futures. The density of the population makes those preparations especially difficult. Campi Flegrei is not an isolated volcanic island where thousands of people can simply board ships and leave. It is embedded within a complex metropolitan region. Homes, schools, businesses, roads, and transportation networks are tightly interconnected. Any large-scale evacuation would involve enormous logistical challenges. Roads would have to accommodate people leaving while emergency vehicles attempted to move in. Temporary shelters would need supplies. Transportation systems would have to operate under pressure. Vulnerable residents would require assistance. Hospitals would need to prepare for injuries. Authorities would have to coordinate across municipalities and agencies. This is why emergency planning must happen before a crisis becomes extreme. Waiting until panic has already begun would make every logistical problem harder to solve. For residents, however, emergency planning can create its own psychological paradox. When authorities discuss evacuation routes, shelters, and emergency zones, some people interpret those preparations as evidence that officials know something frightening is coming. In reality, preparedness is supposed to work precisely because authorities do not know exactly when or whether a disaster will occur. Fire departments prepare for fires without predicting a specific building will burn. Earthquake authorities prepare for earthquakes without knowing the exact date of the next major event. Volcano authorities prepare because the consequences of an eruption could be severe, even when the probability at any particular moment remains uncertain. The existence of a plan should therefore not be interpreted as proof that an eruption is imminent. It should be interpreted as an attempt to reduce the consequences of uncertainty. The restricted intervention zone around Campi Flegrei reflects that approach. Italian authorities have identified areas where the effects of continuing bradyseism could be particularly significant and where emergency measures may need to be prioritized. Planning data identify tens of thousands of residents and thousands of buildings within areas requiring special consideration. Those numbers show the scale of the challenge. This is not simply a matter of placing warning signs around a crater. It is a matter of preparing an entire urban population for a hazard whose behavior can change over time. Every road, bridge, building, and transportation route becomes part of the emergency equation. The volcanic problem, therefore, becomes an engineering problem, a transportation problem, a political problem, and a social problem all at once. The people protesting in Pozzuoli are therefore raising questions that go beyond volcanic prediction. They want to know whether buildings are safe. They want infrastructure repaired. They want transportation systems protected. They want clear information from authorities. They want to understand what would happen if another strong earthquake struck tomorrow. They want to know where their families would go if their homes became unsafe. These are reasonable questions, even if an eruption is not imminent. A resident does not need to believe that Campi Flegrei will erupt next month to demand stronger earthquake preparedness. Someone can fully accept the official yellow alert level and still argue that local infrastructure should be improved. These positions are not contradictory. They reflect a basic reality. Volcanic unrest can create serious consequences long before an eruption begins. For now, The evidence does not justify saying that an eruption is about to happen. It does justify saying that Campi Flegrei deserves sustained attention. The ground has risen substantially over recent years. Earthquakes continue to occur beneath and around Pozzuoli. Some have been strong enough to damage structures and disrupt daily life. The official alert level remains yellow, reflecting an elevated state of volcanic unrest rather than an eruption warning. Those facts can all be true at the same time. The challenge is accepting that uncertainty without allowing it to become an excuse for inaction. A volcano does not provide perfect advance notice, and a city cannot wait for perfect certainty before preparing. The time to strengthen infrastructure, improve communication, and rehearse emergency procedures is while the system remains monitorable. So, are the residents seeing something scientists are not? In one sense, yes. They are seeing the crisis from ground level. They are seeing what happens when geological unrest enters ordinary life. They are seeing the cracks, the disruptions, the fear, and the inconvenience that cannot be fully represented by graphs and satellite images. But that does not mean they have discovered evidence of a secret eruption that scientists are concealing. The Scientific Monitoring Network is watching Campi Flegrei more closely than almost any other volcanic system in Europe. What the data currently show is a restless caldera experiencing continuing seismicity and significant deformation, not a scientifically confirmed imminent eruption. The uncertainty is genuine, so is the risk, and so is the responsibility to prepare.